Hey guys, thanks so much for tuning in. I am Mariah Medina. I am a reporter that did the story that just aired at 10 p.m. So the story focuses on a San Antonio DWI officer um, who essentially pulls somebody over back in July and writes in his official report that this driver abruptly stops on an exit ramp and then refers to the driver as a female and says that the woman could not keep her head straight without holding her head in her hands. And so, I looked at the video. This video was sent to me, and I looked at the video, the dash camera, the body camera, and it didn't add up. And so, I was asking the police department, how do you reconcile these two versions of events? This version of events that occurred in a report, so the officer says, and this version of events that actually occurred that we can see on camera. And so they declined to answer any questions that I had about that particular case and said that they would be better answered in a courtroom. That can take years. I don't have years. And so I reached out to experts in the field, particularly Willie Ng, who is a teacher at the University of the Incarnate Word. He teaches classes on law enforcement and leadership. Willie is now joining me. So, Willie, I don't know if you wanted to introduce yourself and kind of share a little bit about your background. I know you have a very extensive background.
Yes, thank you for having me on the show. I've been in law enforcement for 30 years now, worked with the San Antonio Police Department as a patrol officer, as an investigator, as a field training officer, training those new officers coming right out of the academy. Worked in the federal field, working with the United States Secret Service Joint Task Force, moved on to work as the chief criminal investigator at the district attorney's office. And as you mentioned, recently been starting to teach now as a professor, as an adjunct professor at the University of Incarnate Word. And as a matter of fact, this particular semester, I'm teaching criminal investigations on how to articulate, and what you write is very critical when it comes to the criminal justice system.
Yeah, and you and I had talked about that. I don't know. I don't think a lot of what we talked about, because we talked at length just about how important report writing is. So for you to see this big of a deviation from what actually happened and what's written in the report, does that surprise you?
It does. I mean, because it's drilled into us, even in the academy. I mean, that's a particular course that they teach over and over. And if you can't articulate in your reports, then how can you go out in the field? And not is it only drilled on you in the academy, but when you graduate from the academy and you go into your field training officer, that is one of the things, the categories that you must pass in order to go out on your own. If those are one of the things that you fail and you can't articulate a report, then they will send you back to the academy for remedial training and to take that report writing course over again.
And so you had mentioned this, just, from your experience at the DA's office. What are some of the pitfalls of not being able to articulate, or kind of just being, I don't want to say sloppy, but just kind of treating this as like a run-of-the-mill case?
Well, the worst case scenario is the lack of justice, right? I mean, because I've seen some cases because of the poor report writing or inconsistencies in the report, which brings doubt to the jury, to the judge, that some of these cases we can't move forward on, or we weren't able to, and to the extreme where they do move forward and then the case gets dismissed because you plant that seed of doubt into a juror whether or not this officer is being truthful or not. And sometimes it's not intentional, and sometimes it is intentional when these officers are writing these reports and not telling the truth and not memorializing everything that they saw at that scene.
And I know I had asked you this before, but does a lot of arrests mean good police work? Does that mean that that's a good officer?
No, you should never an agency or a law enforcement officer should never be driven on quota or numbers of arrests, or if I get more arrests, then it makes me look like I'm a better officer than the person who's not making the arrest. I disagree with that. That should not be the moving factor, motivational factor for officers. It should be just doing the job, right? Holding people accountable when it's necessary. Just like I always say, using force when necessary, only absolutely necessary. All those things that you use, your tools in your toolbox, but it's got to be just absolutely necessary. And so I don't think that just because an officer has more arrests than another officer makes that officer any better than the officer who doesn't have as many arrests.
Something that I hear a lot of is, Mariah, these are workers, these are the guys that are being proactive. These are the men and women that are being proactive, and we shouldn't scrutinize them or discourage them from being good workers or hard workers. What's your message to those people?
Well, this is the thing. If we're talking about inconsistencies in report or poor report writing or being lazy and copying and pasting, then in my opinion, that's not a good hardworking officer. A good hardworking officer is, truthful and ethical and writes and takes the time to write and articulate the reports based on what that incident, what was established in that incident, what evidence do you have, what witness statements do you have. That's a good officer, not necessarily one that's going out there arresting a bunch of people and copying and pasting their information. A good officer takes the time to do the job and do the job right.
And so we have one comment that says, that reminds me, the number of tickets officers are required to give each month. Has that policy changed? I don't know if there has ever been a quota. Willie, do you know?
No, I came on the department in 1993 and retired in 2015. And that's when I started the DA's office. And we never had a quota. We were never told by our supervisors that you have to perform and you have to provide X amount of tickets each month, or there's gonna be disciplinary actions. That's not something that I have ever heard from the SAP, San Antonio Police Department. Now, other agencies I can't speak for.
And somebody wanted to know, how are officers held accountable? And I think I asked you this in the car. How are officers held accountable?
Well, that's a whole another story you're gonna have to do, is the inconsistency of that, right? I mean, I think, and not just San Antonio, but just nationally, right? A lot of administrators and leaders either take it to the extreme and they do it for political reasons, to relieve themselves from political pressure. And then some of them will do it just because of how they feel about that individual officer, and that they're not consistent, because if it's somebody within their circle, then they treat that officer much different than if they were outside their circle. So there's a lot of inconsistencies on how they discipline officers or lack thereof.
In this case, the San Antonio Police Department told me that these answers would be, or these questions would be best answered in the courtroom. What's your reaction to that kind of response from a law enforcement agency?
Your questions should be answered in the details of a report. And if there's discrepancies in that report, then there should be a sake of transparency, as the Chief McManus has talked about before. He releases information on shooting incidents when an officer is involved, but withholds information when he chooses to, right? And that goes back to, like I said, the lack of consistency. If you want to be transparent, then you have to be transparent 100% of the time. You can't just do it and pick and choose when it benefits you or benefits your agency. So I think that's a poor response, in my opinion. But the scary thing is that you have these questions, and that goes back to the report writing. You should memorialize every single thing in a report, and you tell the story for the people who aren't there to understand what occurred. And those people are going to be your prosecutors, those people are going to be your judge and your jury, and even the defense attorney. You have to articulate every single incident and everything that you saw, you smelled, you touched, you heard, everything in your report. I mean, report writing is so critical in the criminal justice system, from the officer who first responds, to the evidence technician who comes and collects the evidence, to the detective who investigates the case and provides a prosecution guide. All of those reports have to come in line for the justice system to work.
We're getting a lot of other really great comments. Having been in law enforcement for a good part of my life, it's about 50-50 good officers and bad officers. Made it hard on us good ones. My partner is actually a police officer, and something that he's told me is that, the one thing that he hates more than anything else, more than the worst criminal in the world, is a crooked police officer, because it makes it so difficult
Yeah,
for
it's a
police.
true statement. I've always said that. No one likes a bad officer more than the good officer, right? I mean, we dislike it because it labels all of us. I mean,
Mhm.
we saw it. I saw it when I was in the department. Every time there was a bad incident that happened in another state, we were being judged not because of who we were, our
Right.
colors, or our skin, but because of the uniform we wore. And so it is true. It's a very true statement, and that is why I think it's important for us to hold those bad apples, because every occupation has them, right? I mean, I was
Oh,
in the
yeah.
DA's office and we filed cases on dentists, all kinds of doctors, lawyers. I mean, so there's bad apples in every occupation, but the important thing is to hold those bad apples accountable, remove them from that occupation because they don't deserve to be there. That way, it protects those officers who are out there really, truly doing a good job for the community and risking their lives for others.
Right. No, I agree with you. And you hit the nail right on the head when you had talked about like other agencies so far away from San Antonio. You know, everybody pays for the sins of somebody in the middle of nowhere.
Right.
Um, Benjamin Ramos, look at Bexar County DWI, check how many arrests are found to be under, include blood draws with no drugs. Benjamin, that's a great point. Prior to my time in the news, I actually have a law degree, and I worked with attorneys that specialize in DWI, and something that I saw a lot of was that individuals came in below the blood alcohol level. And the scary thing is, in Texas, you can be arrested just based off the subjective opinion, of an officer. So it's very important that these reports are correct. Very, very important.
That's right.
But I definitely will look into that, Benjamin. Thanks so much for that tip. Um, let's see. Do people that received a DWI see these reports and how do they react? Willie, you might be able to chime in on this. In your time at the DA's office, did you ever experience, or get to see firsthand how involved the criminal defendant was in, I guess, in their criminal defense?
Well, they have a representation, right, to have a defense attorney. So it doesn't allow us to sit really and talk to the actual individual arrested. Um, but we can tell the reaction from those who are arrested through their defense attorney, and the shock sometimes through the facial expressions from the person who was arrested, based on reading the reports. And then once we start looking at body cam and dash cam and all those things, we're trying to make sure that everything is consistent. That is usually when, if it's something really egregious, that we just throw the case out and
Yeah.
say we're not going to prosecute or try to prosecute this individual when the evidence doesn't support what the officer is stating happened in the report based on all the other evidence, right? Because again, I like the fact, I know some officers didn't like the body cam and the dash cam. I left the patrol streets before the body cam was mandatory.
Yeah.
But if I was on the street still today, I wouldn't mind at all. I have nothing to hide. When I was a patrol officer, so put a body cam on me and let it record my work. I wouldn't have been concerned with I'm going to get caught doing something wrong because I didn't do anything wrong. So I like the fact that we have all those tools and resources to make sure that we're holding the right person accountable.
Right. No, I agree. Could a shortage of officers play a role in accountability? Oh, yes, definitely. I don't
Yeah,
know if you want to weigh in on this.
yeah. It shouldn't play a role, but I mean, I would imagine that it does. I mean, that's a speculation, because if you're already shorthanded, and some smaller agencies that only have a handful of officers, it may cause them to make a different decision on terms of what kind of action they want to take, or immediate action, I should say. Um,
Right.
Again, San Antonio is such a large agency. I believe they have over 2,000 sworn officers. I'm not sure if that would be the case with SAPD, but I know that they're short as well.
Right. No, definitely. I believe it was like 2,500 sworn, but in terms of comparison to other major cities in the state of Texas, San Antonio remains one of the smallest per capita um, officers per capita. But at the same time, San Antonio is very, very unique in terms of just comparisons to each of these other major cities. Um, Somebody said, oh, yes. Okay. So do the people that received a DWI see these reports? Going back to that question, generally, yes, they have access to any and all discovery that is sent over to their defense counsel. I've seen cases in which an individual who is out on bond would come into the office, review the body camera footage, review the police report. Hey, this is what happened. This is what I said to the officer. Because, you never really know until you review all of the evidence against an individual. And so it's very, very, very important that all of this lines up. A question that was posed to me, just, I tend to, triple double check that the stories that I'm doing resonate or are not like so far in the weeds. And so somebody had asked, so what is the I guess concern here? And I'm like, when it comes to somebody's freedom, and I don't know if you can speak to that, Willie, when it comes to somebody's freedom, you want to get it right.
That's right. And you're right. I mean, I know some people will ask that same question, like, what's the big deal? Well, the big deal is that it could be you one day, right? It could be a loved one, it could be a relative. And we've got to address these issues and make sure that we hold everyone accountable in every aspect. And again, I want to reemphasize this, is that the way we hold people accountable that are breaking the law is to take the time to investigate and report everything correctly. Because the last thing we want to do is someone who deserves to be accountable in the court of law not be held accountable because of poor report writing. So that's the big deal about this also, right? It's not just officers that may be being lazy or copying and pasting information. It's about holding people accountable. And if we don't take the time to do it right and write our reports correctly and investigate these cases correctly, someone who should be held accountable may not have. And then we still have that person out in the streets doing whatever it is they're doing.
Diana has a question here. If a police officer pulls you over for speeding and then calls another officer and the first officer leaves, isn't he accountable for that? Because the second officer gave me a DWI and had me arrested. So Diana, how it works generally is when an officer pulls you over for a traffic stop, this can be just a regular officer. They're going to call in a DWI officer from the DWI unit. And so that's the second officer that comes in. And that person is generally a specialist in that particular field. And in this case, this individual was a DWI unit or DWI enforcement officer. I understand, it's terrible. You say nobody would hear you out. You volunteered for a breathalyzer. And I'm hearing overwhelmingly that this is a case for so many individuals across the city of San Antonio and Bexar County that I feel like this reporting, I understand DWI is a huge issue in San Antonio and Bexar County, but it needs to be done right. These investigations need to be done right. And you prove this point very, very much. You're upset at the system because of the way you were treated over a speeding ticket. The fact of the matter is that a lot of my reporting on this particular topic is about people like you that the report doesn't match what the video says. So I'm sorry that this happened to you. I would love to chat with you at length. I can put my email in the comments, but yeah. And Felipe, unfortunately, in a perfect world, it would be, not that I believe in the criminalization of not releasing records, but in a perfect world, it would be great if government agencies released records within a certain period of time. But they definitely don't do that. They definitely don't. I have a lot of outstanding open records requests. You can file as many complaints as you want. I believe only one individual has been prosecuted under that statute, but and that was in Harris County, and that charge was eventually dismissed. But again, perfect world. Do we have any other questions here? Let's see. Yes, of course, Diana. And again, I'm very sorry that that happened to you. Um, that shouldn't happen to anybody. Again, I say in a perfect world, but like even in a semi, you know, perfect world, it shouldn't happen. It comes down to somebody's life and liberty, so it should be done right. Willie, Bob in the background, do we have any other questions? If not, did you want to wrap now?
No, I think you covered everything. And again, I just want all those who are listening and watching to just remember that this is not about picking on the officer or defending the person who was arrested. It's about getting it right and making sure that we're articulating everything so that way when people are brought to justice, the justice is served, right? Because the last thing I want to see, and I have seen, is for someone to get away with the crime that shouldn't have because there was poor report writing. And of course, and then the other side of it is that we don't want people to wrongly get arrested just to increase the numbers of the arrest. That should never be a motive of a law enforcement officer ever. And if that's the motive of an officer is to arrest as many people for the month and brag about the number that he has listed, then that person probably should find another occupation.
Right. Yes, that was certainly something that has come up a lot. A lot of people that turn and burn. I've heard this saying a lot in my time working with law enforcement. You might beat the rap, but you won't beat the ride. In other words, you can beat the charge, but you're not going to beat the ride to jail. And that's a very antiquated way of thinking.
Absolutely.
Very antiquated way of thinking. And so talking to very, very great law enforcement officers. One in particular told me, the individuals that I arrested, I had a 100% conviction rate.
That's right.
But let's see. No more questions so far. So we're going to go ahead and wrap it up here. My information is in the chat. If you guys have any story ideas, whether it's about this topic or anything else, please don't hesitate to reach out. And Willie, thank you so much. Thank you so much for helping me out with this and for tuning in and taking part in this Facebook Live and YouTube Live.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, you guys take care.